Sydney has one of the most biodiverse harbours in the world. It is home to a beautiful and rich marine environment. The underwater and above water landscapes are truly unique, unlike anywhere else in the world. But something has disappeared from these waters. Shellfish reefs once formed the backbone of many temperate and subtropical estuaries, and while small populations continue to exist in most bays and estuaries, these are only a small fraction compared to the numbers seen pre-European settlement. Some researchers suggest that we have lost 85% of our natural oyster reefs worldwide, making these reef systems among the world's most threatened marine habitats. There are a number of factors that have contributed to this decline in Sydney Harbour. In the 19th century, oysters were harvested widely, not only for food but also for their high lime content, which was actually used in mortar in roads and buildings. There are even reports from the 1860s indicating a need to restore oyster beds, particularly around population centres such as Sydney. This overexploitation of wild stocks actually led to oysters being one of the first regulated fisheries in Australia. As the city grew, urban development and industrialisation put additional pressures on our environment, especially our marine life. So despite the fact that overharvesting is no longer a major issue in Sydney, urban runoff, water pollution, sedimentation and disease have all impeded the recovery of shellfish reefs, and we are now only beginning to turn the corner. Oysters and oyster reefs provide an important structural as well as ecological component of our estuaries. They're the ultimate eco-engineers. They filter water, take up excess nutrients from our waterways, and process fine sediments that get washed off the land. Oyster reefs themselves provide a wonderful 3D habitat full of cavities and holes for other marine organisms such as bivalves, snails, crabs, and algae. This in turn attracts fish and other large marine species that feed off the smaller creatures. More habitat means more fish. Another great advantage of these reefs is that they act as a fantastic natural breakwater, buffering and absorbing wave energy directed at the shoreline. They reduce erosion caused by boat wash, wind, waves and storms. Bordering our shorelines, these reefs help to protect our coastal assets, which might be national parks, productive mangroves and salt marsh areas, or they could be coastal properties. In the past, the approach to shoreline protection has been driven from a hard engineering perspective. Hard structures such as seawalls have been built to protect our land-based assets, and very little consideration has been given to the ecological impacts of these hard structures. Over 50% of the foreshore in Sydney Harbour has been artificially constructed, resulting in a significant loss of our natural habitats and all the plants and animals that these support.
Whilst we can't turn back the clock and recreate the marine conditions that existed prior to European settlement, at OceanWatch we're looking at green eco-engineering techniques to restore oyster reefs in Sydney Harbour. We've worked alongside Australia's leading engineers and ecologists, and we're focused on balancing shoreline protection and habitat creation.
The concept all starts with the use of waste oyster shells. Annually, Australian restaurants and primary industries discard around 10,000 tonnes of waste oyster shell to landfill every year. We want to take some of these waste shells and demonstrate that they can be used for environmental projects.
These loose shells are bagged and then pegged on the bank of an eroding shoreline. In their early days of life, baby oysters are actually free-swimming larvae, and they love nothing better than to settle on other oyster shells. Our structures will therefore encourage the settlement of baby oysters. Over time, the oysters grow, and as they do, they secrete a kind of natural cement. This will serve to bind the reef structure together. For our first pilot project, we sourced oyster shells from two main locations. The first being oyster farmers from Port Stephens, and the second being from the Star, Sydney, who donated oyster shells from one of their buffet restaurants.
Using Sydney Harbour trial sites, living shorelines in the form of oyster reefs will not only reduce coastal erosion, but will also provide a suite of additional ecosystem services. These include water filtration, habitat and food for fish, invertebrates and birds, stabilisation of adjacent habitat, carbon sequestration and riparian vegetation enhancement. The concept of living shorelines is fairly new to Australia, but there are many examples of successful projects overseas, particularly in the US. One living shoreline project has not only successfully restored a living oyster reef, but as a result has also doubled the local fish population. If we see similar results in Sydney Harbour, this will be welcome news for our fishers, the community and the environment, because great habitat leads to great fisheries.